Don't forget to subscribe as you enjoy the story. Grace stood quietly at the plaintiff's table, her eyes fixed on the wooden grain of the courtroom floor. Her hands trembled, but she clenched them into fists to stop the shaking. Across from her, the defense attorney stood tall in a crisp navy suit, a woman with a confident voice and a smile that never reached her eyes. "Your Honor," the attorney said, turning toward the bench, "my client provides a stable home, consistent meals, and emotional support. Miss Carter, on the other hand, can barely afford basic necessities." Grace didn't flinch, but each word landed like a blow. The judge remained silent, eyes focused on Grace as if trying to measure her entire life in a glance. Behind her, 7-year-old Logan sat beside his little sister Alina, their feet swinging off the bench. Grace didn't turn to look at them. She couldn't risk letting the tears in her eyes fall. She had no fancy house, no private school applications, no shining numbers on paper. But she had never missed a bedtime story. She had patched their jackets by hand and warmed water on the stove when the heater failed. She had stayed. And she was here, still standing. Just as the lawyer began listing more of her failures, Grace felt a gentle tug on her sleeve. She looked down. Logan stood holding something in his small hand. "Judge," he said clearly, "can I show you something?" The courtroom froze. Even the attorney blinked in surprise. "Logan, no," Grace whispered. But he was already stepping forward, pulling a folded piece of paper from his coat. Her stomach flipped. He had no idea what it was. But as Logan moved toward the bench, Trevor, her ex-husband, sat up suddenly, his calm expression slipping. Logan's footsteps echoed softly as he crossed the courtroom. He held the paper with both hands like it was something sacred. The judge, a gray-haired man named Judge Whitmore, raised an eyebrow but nodded. "Come forward, son," he said. Grace felt her chest tighten. She had no idea what Logan was doing, but something told her it was important. Trevor shifted in his seat, his confident posture beginning to crack. His lawyer leaned toward him, whispering urgently, but he didn't respond. Logan reached the bench and held the paper up. The judge took it gently and unfolded it. The courtroom held its breath. Grace's palms began to sweat. Her eyes darted between the judge and her son. She could feel her heartbeat in her ears. Logan returned to his seat beside Alina, who hugged his arm tightly. The judge's eyes moved slowly across the letter. Then his expression began to change. Grace saw it. The furrow in his brow, the narrowing of his eyes, the sharp intake of breath. Judge Whitmore looked up, first at Logan then at Trevor. "Mr. Carter," he said, his voice low but firm. "Would you care to explain this?" The silence was so heavy it felt like gravity itself had increased. Trevor opened his mouth, then shut it again. His lawyer stood frozen. "Your Honor, I'm not sure," she began. "You didn't write this?" the judge interrupted, holding up the paper. "This document, written by a CPA, details financial steps taken to hide income, transfer assets, and manipulate custody outcomes. It's dated 3 months before divorce papers were filed." Grace's jaw dropped. She could barely breathe. She'd suspected things, but to hear it confirmed, out loud in a courtroom, was something else entirely. Trevor still said nothing. His face had gone pale. Grace watched as the judge read more of the letter aloud. Quote, "Ensure the mother has minimal legal standing by reducing her access to resources. Maintain primary custody to limit financial obligation." The courtroom was dead silent. Even the court clerk looked shocked. Judge Whitmore folded the letter and placed it in front of him. "This appears to be a deliberate attempt to deceive this court and deny a mother custody of her children through financial manipulation," he said sternly. Trevor stood up abruptly. "It's not what it looks like," he blurted. "It was just advice. I didn't use it." "Sit down, Mr. Carter," the judge said sharply. "You will have your turn to respond in due process." Grace held on to the edge of the table. Alina had curled into her side, and Logan was staring at his father with a calm, steady look far beyond his years. The judge turned to Grace. "Miss Carter, were you aware of this letter?" She shook her head. "No, Your Honor. This is the first time I've ever seen it." "And your son found it?" "Yes. He never told me about it until today." The judge nodded slowly. "Logan, would you mind telling me how you came across this?" Logan looked up. His voice was soft but clear. "I was looking for my tablet at Dad's house. I found it in a folder in his closet. I didn't want anyone to be in trouble. I just didn't want to lose my mom. A soft gasp escaped from somewhere in the courtroom. Grace reached over and held his hand tightly. You did the right thing, Logan, the judge said. Thank you. Trevor leaned back, jaw clenched, eyes dark with frustration. Judge Whitmore straightened the stack of papers before him. This court is pausing these custody proceedings immediately to initiate a formal investigation into Mr. Carter's financial conduct. A wave of murmurs swept through the courtroom. Grace's mouth fell open slightly. She couldn't believe what she was hearing. In the meantime, the judge continued, primary custody will remain with Miss Carter. Mr. Carter's visitation is temporarily suspended until this matter is resolved. Trevor's lawyer opened her mouth, then closed it again. She knew there was nothing she could say. Trevor sat silently, glaring at the floor. Grace was frozen. Her legs shook. She sank into her chair and wrapped both arms around her children. Alina whispered, "Are we okay now?" Grace nodded, though her voice wouldn't work. "Yes, baby. We're okay." After court adjourned, Grace didn't move right away. The other people in the room filed out slowly, whispering to each other. But she sat there holding her children, trying to absorb what had just happened. Logan leaned into her shoulder. "Did I mess up, Mom?" he asked. She kissed the top of his head. "No, baby," she said softly. "You didn't mess up. You saved us." Outside, the cold air hit her cheeks, but it felt good. Pling. Logan zipped up Alina's coat and reached for Grace's hand. She gripped it tightly. For the first time in months, the fear had loosened its grip. It wasn't gone. But something stronger was taking its place: hope. In the days that followed, a court-appointed investigator named Ms. Trent reached out to Grace. She was warm, professional, and didn't talk down to her. They met at a small office near the courthouse. Ms. Trent took notes, asked thoughtful questions, and read the letter Logan had found with focused attention. "Do I have your permission to pull all financial records?" she asked. "Everything. Tax filings, asset transfers, credit reports." Grace nodded without hesitation. "You do. I have nothing to hide." A quiet strength began to rise in her chest. This time the truth was finally on her side. The investigation moved fast. Within a week, Ms. Trent uncovered documents that confirmed everything in the letter. Trevor had created fake business entities, funneled income into shell companies, and wired funds overseas. He had lied on financial disclosure forms and underreported his earnings. The paper trail was undeniable. Grace sat at her small kitchen table, reading every update with wide eyes. She felt something begin to rebuild inside her. Trust in her instincts, belief in her worth. For years, Trevor had made her doubt herself. But now the facts were louder than his lies. The final hearing arrived. Grace stood at the courthouse steps, this time wearing a dress she'd bought with her own savings and shoes that didn't hurt her feet. She had legal support now. A lawyer from a women's advocacy center who stood beside her like a shield. Inside, Trevor looked smaller than before. His new lawyer avoided eye contact. When the judge entered, everyone rose. He didn't waste time. After reviewing evidence from the financial investigation, this court finds clear proof that Mr. Carter engaged in deceptive practices to influence these proceedings, he said. Then he turned to Grace. "Miss Carter, your resilience and dedication to your children is evident. This court grants you full physical and legal custody of Logan and Alina." Grace exhaled slowly, her vision blurring with tears. It was over. She had won. The judge's words echoed in Grace's mind. Full custody. Legal custody. It didn't seem real at first. She looked at Logan and Alina beside her, both watching quietly, sensing the shift even if they didn't fully understand it. Trevor didn't say a word. His lawyer just nodded tightly and began gathering her papers. The judge signed the order and added, "Mr. Carter is ordered to pay backdated child support. His visitation will be monitored and re-evaluated after 6 months." The gavel hit the bench, firm and final. Grace didn't move until the courtroom began to clear. Then she knelt beside her children and hugged them tight. "We did it," she whispered. "We really did." That night they celebrated in the only way they knew how: pancakes for dinner. Logan made smiley faces with chocolate chips. Alina danced in the kitchen wearing a towel like a cape. Grace laughed for the first time in weeks, a sound that felt like sunlight through a storm. Their apartment was still small. The heater still rattled. But that night the fear was gone. Grace sat on the floor with her children, holding them both while the radio played soft music. Logan was sketching something on a notepad. Grace glanced down and smiled. It was a picture of a house with 3 stick figures. Above it he had written, "Home is where Mom is." Over the next few weeks life didn't become perfect, but it became peaceful. Grace kept working her part-time cleaning jobs, budgeting carefully and saving every extra dollar. She also began looking for office work that would offer benefits and steady hours. One afternoon she landed an interview at a small bookkeeping firm downtown. The manager liked her honesty and offered her a training role. It wasn't glamorous, but it was stable. Grace accepted it without hesitation. She wanted more than survival now, she wanted a future. One she could build with her own hands. Meanwhile the children began to bloom. Alina, once shy and quiet, made a best friend at preschool and came home each day chattering about art projects and story time. Logan joined the school's art club. His teacher said he had a gift for detail and praised his quiet leadership. One afternoon he came home with a drawing framed in cardboard. It was a large tree with roots going deep into the ground. Underneath it he had written one word in capital letters: growing. Grace hung it on the wall next to the kitchen table. One evening as they curled on the couch watching cartoons, Logan turned to Grace. "Mom," he asked softly, "was I in trouble for bringing that letter?" Grace paused the TV and turned to him. "No, sweetheart. You were brave. You told the truth when it mattered most." He leaned into her shoulder, his little arms wrapping around her. Grace stroked his hair and held back tears. That letter had changed everything. It was more than just paper. It was his voice, his courage, his belief in right and wrong. Trevor didn't disappear completely, but his presence faded. He showed up to 3 monitored visits, each one stiff and short, then stopped calling. Grace never explained the details to the kids. She simply said, "Your dad's not ready to be consistent right now." They stopped asking after a while. Grace no longer waited for the next blow, the next threat. The fear that had lived in her chest for so long had finally loosened its grip. It was replaced by something she hadn't felt in years: safety. Grace started going to counseling at the local community center. At first she felt awkward saying things out loud, things she had locked away for years. But each session helped her shed shame like an old coat. "Being poor doesn't mean you're failing," her counselor said. "It means you're fighting with what you have." Slowly Grace began to believe it. She saw how hard she had worked to hold her family together. Not perfectly, but with love, with grit, with a kind of strength that doesn't get awards but deserves them. She enrolled in evening classes online, using a refurbished laptop she bought on sale. She studied bookkeeping and small business accounting, subjects she'd always liked but never thought she could make a living from. She would sit at the kitchen table after the kids were in bed, reading while sipping cheap tea. Every passing week she felt her confidence grow. It wasn't just about making money. It was about rebuilding the version of herself that Trevor had tried to erase. Grace's support network also began to grow. She joined a local parenting group, made friends with another mom from Alina's preschool, and reconnected with a cousin she hadn't seen in years. These weren't flashy connections. They didn't show up on paper. But they made her feel less alone. For so long, it had just been her and the kids against the world. Now it was still them, but with hands reaching out to help. Logan began talking more at school. His teacher sent home a note that said, "He's starting to lead group projects. He's kind and thoughtful. You're doing something right." Grace pinned that note next to his drawing on the wall. Every time she walked past it she smiled. Because for all the court documents and battles, for all the silence she had once endured, this was her proof. Not the judge's ruling, not the legal custody papers, but the laughter in her kitchen, the tiny socks drying on the line, and the bedtime kisses that always came with, "I love you." One Saturday Grace and the kids visited the park. The sun was warm and laughter from other families filled the air. Grace watched as Alina spun in circles on the grass, and Logan sat under a tree sketching with a small pad in his lap. She sat on the bench, sipping coffee from a reusable cup and let the moment settle in. She didn't have to look over her shoulder anymore. No one was coming to take her children. No one was going to silence her again. Later that evening Logan asked again about the letter. "Do you think Dad's mad at me?" he asked quietly. Grace shook her head. "Maybe. But that's not what matters. What matters is you told the truth. That's what brave people do." He nodded, this time with more peace in his eyes. He said. I just didn't want to lose you. Grace held him close. You never will. Months passed. Bill still came. Work was still tiring. But Grace's life had direction now. She was growing stronger every day, not just for her kids but for herself. The day she received her first certification, she framed it and placed it on the same wall as Logan's drawing. Different kinds of roots, all planted in hope. Sometimes Grace thought back to that first day in court, the way she had felt small, broken, and voiceless. And then she thought of Logan standing up, pulling that letter from his pocket. The smallest voice in the room had spoken the loudest truth. Not just about Trevor but about love, justice, and courage. That was the moment everything changed. Grace tucked her children into bed that night, the windows open to let in the evening breeze. Mom, Alina said sleepily, are we safe now? Grace kissed her forehead. Yes, sweetheart. We're safe. We're home. She turned off the light and sat on the couch, staring out at the stars. Not everything was perfect, but it was theirs. The fight had been long and the wounds still healing. But they had each other. And as Grace wrapped herself in a worn blanket and listened to the soft breath of her children asleep down the hall, she knew one thing with absolute certainty: they had already won. Moral lesson: true strength isn't measured by wealth or appearance, but by love, integrity, and the courage to stand up for what's right, even when your voice is small and the odds are great.